right, so let's now turn our attention to the tax audit process itself. Let's do an overview. What will a typical field audit look like? What kind of stages do we go through from beginning to end? That is what we'll do at this point, right? So a typical field audit will start with a notice of audit. This is where the taxpayer is notified you have been selected for an audit. This is the proposed date. We'll cover this area, this tax type. And the tax types that will be covered will span across maybe 2019, 2020, 2021 years of assessment. But there must be a notice of audit. This is a requirement of law. Section 36, subsection 4 of Act 915, which is the Revenue Administration Act, requires that the Commissioner General gives advance notice to the taxpayer of their selection for the audit. In practice, this selection letter or notification letter, as it's so called, may come with a letter of introduction, which will let you know who the appointed tax auditors from the GRA will be, right? Who you're going to relate with during the audit process. This same letter may propose what we call the entrance conference, right? So there can be a scheduled date for the entrance conference, but the point is no audit starts without a notification. Audits are not done by surprise, right? Typically, a field audit properly conducted, there should be the need for a notice or a notification to the taxpayer of their selection. The second stage is what we call the pre-audit research and review stage. Like I've said in the past, you cannot audit what you do not understand, right? So you need to set aside time to understand the taxpayer, review their reporting history, review any prior audits. If this taxpayer has been audited before, ask yourself, what were the common areas identified in the previous audit? It will give you an idea what the potential risk areas are. So in your audit planning process, you get to prioritize on those risks. And at least when you go on field eventually, it gives you an idea what the possible areas could be again, right, this time. So here, you draw up your preliminary objectives for the audit plan, and then you get the head of audits to approve. But remember that you need to do some before audit. So pre-audit is before you start the audit, do your research, go through the various information sources described in class already, right? So we said you look at so many different things. Review their board meeting minutes, prior year financials, previously filed returns, previous audit reports, even things you find on the internet. Get to understand their industry, get to understand their business, get to understand their financial risk and their business risk before you even step on the field to start the audit. It's very important, this second stage. The third stage is the taxpayer contact stage. The taxpayer contact stage. Now, this is where you start initial conversations to discuss their business, their operations, and determine the requisite documentation. Don't forget that before we got to stage 3 here, we had done stage 1, where we notify them that, oh, listen, you have been selected for an audit, we'll be on field on this date, on that date, to do this and this, cover withholding taxes. Your payroll or PAYE will cover VAT, and it will cover, for example, 2020, 21, and 22 years of assessment, right? By stage 3, you contact the taxpayer. Now here, we've spoken about the fact that it could be so many different things, right? But you start some initial conversations, nothing deep. You could do an initial preliminary interview to get further clarity. Maybe things you could not identify at stage 2 here, you can shift to stage 3 and discuss with the taxpayer to get a fair idea of what their business is, to fill in any gaps you may have from your stage 2, right? So we start initial conversations to discuss their business operations. And this is where you get the chance to ask them for supporting documentation. So you give them what we call the information document or the information request list, where you tell them, I need this financial statement from this year to that year. I need your trial balance. I need ledgers. I need bank statements, right? So you submit this at stage 3, getting ready for the audit. Then stage 4 is where you have your entrance conference, right? So you schedule a specific meeting, a formal discussion. Entrance conference as we'll find out shortly, there's another one called the exit conference, right? Take note in the exam, you could see them say entrance meeting is the same thing as the entrance conference, yeah? So this is a meeting you conduct, formal discussion with the taxpayer on the audit. But let's not lose sight of the fact that under Section 17 of Act 915, which is the Revenue Administration Act, it's called the right to representation. So the taxpayer has the right to appoint a representative. Do not forget the form I showed you, the power of attorney form, right? So you can appoint your consultant or who your tax advisor is, whoever, to represent you. Remember, we've said GRA reserves the right to not deal with your appointed representative if they've not gone through the right channels, which is what completing that form, for example. So at the entrance conference, you can be there yourself, or if you need representation, you can utilize your powers under Section 17 of Act 915 as a taxpayer to get representation. So here, first official meeting, first formal meeting. Don't forget that under stage 3, there could be a meeting, right? It could be a very short interview meeting. You could do a premises tour and all of that. But really, the entrance conference is where we have like a really formal discussion where who is who, everybody will be there at that meeting to discuss what the audit is, what the plan is, when they plan to complete the audit, what the areas are, and any concerns can be brought up at this particular stage. Then stage 5 is where you do a lot of the audit work, where you examine the taxpayer's record. So here you do your field work. So many things to go on here. You gather evidence that will let you arrive at your assessment, right? You do your test of controls. You test your internal controls. You do your walkthrough tests. All your compliance tests will come here. You understand the taxpayer's accounting system, understand their financial reporting system. If they have an accounting software, you get to understand it here. You do all your substantive tests, right? You make sure you do everything to ensure the assertions you are trying to test are properly tested. So all of that occurs under stage 5. Then at stage 6, you have your exit conference. If entrance conference is done at the beginning of the audit, then clearly exit conference is done at the end of the audit. Here you inform the taxpayer of any tax assessments that have come up. You tell them that, okay, during the course of our work, we found that you had wrongly computed capital allowance for the past 3 years. So you over deducted. So we have what assessed you to the tune of X amount, right? So you do this at the exit conference. Key thing I want to mention is that remember, one of your duties as a tax auditor from the perspective of the exam is to inform the taxpayer of any liabilities at this stage. Because at the exit conference stage, don't forget this report will still be in a draft report form. There's no need for you to wait till matters are finalized before you inform the taxpayer. So if there are some pending issues, maybe they could give you additional information to clarify. So at the exit conference stage, apart from discussing potential liabilities, you give the taxpayer the opportunity, a fair hearing, to provide any clarity or additional information that they have to clarify whatever stance you currently have. So remember, the exit conference comes next. Then in some cases, there is an asterisk here because we don't always have a reconciliation conference. But should a taxpayer provide additional information, it is possible for the audit supervisor to meet with the team and the taxpayer to address any outstanding issues raised by the audit findings. So here, you quickly go over any additional information presented to see if that amends or varies the initial assessment in any way. Do not forget again that at this point, the report is still not a final report. It's still in a draft format. So it is not technically a binding assessment, like we said. So there is still the room for you to negotiate, speak with the GRA, get them to take more information from you, provide more documents, provide receipts, credit certificates from the past that show that that liability should not be there, right? So this may not be done at every single audit, but it exists in some particular cases. And then the final audit report is issued. If you wait for the audit to get here, this becomes an assessment, right? So like we said, both the taxpayer and the tax audit team have to ensure that any matters that can be resolved before the final audit report should be resolved. Some of the issues that will come up will mainly be because no supporting documentation was provided. You see, so if you don't resolve those things that can be resolved, and it becomes a final audit report, then the taxpayer has to object through the entire objection process we've discussed as well, right? So here we determine whatever will happen at the reconciliation conference, and the audit team will finalize the report, get it to go through the entire review process. Then you get an assessment issued to you as a tax auditor. In all this, don't forget the taxpayer reserves the right to object under Section 42 of Act 915, which is the Revenue Administration Act. So this gives us a bird's eye view, an overview of the tax audit process for a field audit. Like we said, there are other types of audits, right? So this gives you an overview. So what we'll be doing over the next few weeks, right, will be to take each of these steps and go as deep as we can into all of these stages. By the time we are done, you should understand really well how tax audits are conducted in Ghana. So if there are any questions, you can let me know until we move to the next discussion.